The war of words and actions between Washington and Caracas has reached a new boiling point. Standing before reporters, US President Donald Trump declared that America had escalated its campaign at sea. Trump said, "Stop sending drugs into the United States. We knocked off actually 3 boats, not 2, but you saw 2, and the problem is there are very few boats out on the water. There are not a lot of boats out on the water. I can't imagine why. Not even fishing boats. There's nobody. Nobody wants to go take a fish. So it's one of those things. I would say to him very strongly, stop sending people from your prisons into our country." This was no ordinary remark. It marked confirmation that the US military has now struck 3 Venezuelan vessels in less than 3 weeks, an unprecedented escalation in the Caribbean. Trump used the briefing to send a direct message to Nicolás Maduro, and his words reverberated far beyond Washington. The announcement was backed with images and videos that reinforced America's growing naval presence in the region. US warships, including the guided missile cruiser USS Lake Erie, have been spotted maneuvering through the Panama Canal, underscoring the seriousness of this deployment. The optics are unmistakable. Washington is bringing its military might directly to the doorstep of Venezuela. Trump himself took to his Truth Social account to release grainy but dramatic footage. These videos, labelled as kinetic strikes, depicted speedboats being destroyed at sea. In one clip, Trump claimed that 11 narcoterrorists were killed. In another, he announced a second strike, this time leaving 3 Venezuelans dead. By showcasing these strikes publicly, the White House presented them as proof of action, a visible warning to Venezuela and to the region that the United States would act decisively against what it defines as international narcotics trafficking. But Caracas tells a very different story. On state television, Venezuelan Foreign Minister Iván Gil displayed photographs of a fishing boat named Carmen Rosa, alleging that the vessel had been unfairly targeted and its crew harassed by US warships. In parallel, footage emerged from Venezuelan fishermen showing the imposing silhouette of an American destroyer edging closer to their boats. For Venezuelan officials, these images served as evidence of intimidation, not interdiction. It was President Nicolás Maduro himself who escalated the rhetorical clash. Appearing before both national and international media, Maduro denounced Washington's campaign in searing terms. He declared, "It is a judicial aggression when we are criminalized. It is a political aggression with their daily threatening statements. It is a diplomatic aggression, and it is an aggression in the making of a military nature. And Venezuela is empowered by international law to confront this aggression fully." His words painted a picture of a nation under siege. He rejected Washington's claims of a drug war and instead framed the confrontation as a coordinated assault on Venezuelan sovereignty. Maduro's warnings were not merely verbal. Surrounded by generals and officers, he announced that the Venezuelan military was fully mobilized. He said, "The Bolivarian National Armed Forces, with all their equipment and troops, are ready. We are now going to consolidate our positions and the national defense system." The message was clear. Venezuela would not be intimidated. The military would stand in readiness, consolidating defensive positions and projecting strength both at home and abroad. This dramatic exchange marks one of the tensest episodes in US-Venezuelan relations in decades. The Trump administration has long accused Nicolás Maduro of overseeing the so-called Cartel de los Soles, a clandestine network of senior military officials allegedly involved in drug trafficking. While the existence of this cartel remains the subject of debate, Washington has used the allegations to justify the deployment of 8 US naval vessels into the southern Caribbean. The timeline of escalation is telling. On September 2nd, Trump announced the first strike, claiming that 11 traffickers had been killed at sea. Less than 2 weeks later, another strike followed, this time taking the lives of 3 Venezuelans whom Trump branded narco-terrorists. And by mid-September, Trump confirmed that 3 Venezuelan vessels had been destroyed in total. Each of these announcements was carefully choreographed, framed as both law enforcement and national defense. Trump's use of terms such as proof and narco-terrorists reflects a deliberate strategy, casting Venezuela not just as a failed state, but as an exporter of crime and violence that directly threatens American shores. His blunt warning that Maduro is sending people from your prisons into our country added another explosive layer to the confrontation. On the other side, Maduro has worked to internationalize the dispute by labeling the strikes as judicial, political, diplomatic, and military aggression. He seeks to situate Venezuela's struggle within a global context, portraying the country as a victim of imperial overreach. His repeated references to international law serve not only as a legal shield, but as a rallying cry for sympathetic nations and institutions. The regional implications of this clash are profound. In Colombia, which shares a tense and porous border with Venezuela, security analysts fear that maritime skirmishes could spill into disputed territories, sparking wider instability. In Brazil, officials express concern about the fragile balance of security in South America and the risk that Venezuelan militarization could destabilize border regions. Across the region, diplomats worry that the confrontation may test the limits of international law, particularly the United Nations Charter's provisions on the use of force. Inside Venezuela, the military has been mobilized in full view of the public. State television has showcased troop deployments, artillery movements, and naval patrols, part deterrence, part theatre. Yet analysts question whether this mobilization is sustainable or symbolic, especially given Venezuela's ongoing economic collapse and resource shortages. For many ordinary Venezuelans, the escalating tension with the United States only deepens a sense of isolation, compounding the pain of sanctions and economic hardship. In Washington, officials argue that these operations are narrowly targeted against drug networks and are not intended as steps toward regime change. Still, the optics of US destroyers shadowing Venezuelan boats and fishermen pleading innocence undermine that narrative. The line between counter-narcotics enforcement and geopolitical confrontation grows increasingly blurred. For the United States, the strikes serve both domestic and foreign policy objectives. Domestically, they allow Trump to project toughness on crime and border security. Internationally, they signal America's willingness to use force in its own hemisphere, echoing a long tradition of US interventions in Latin America. For Maduro, however, the confrontation offers a political lifeline. By framing Venezuela as a victim of foreign aggression, he rallies nationalist sentiment, shifts attention from economic hardship, and positions himself as the defender of sovereignty against external threats. As the Caribbean waters grow increasingly militarized, the confrontation between Trump and Maduro is more than a clash of boats. It is a clash of narratives. On one side, Washington portrays itself as the guardian of US security, striking narcoterrorists before they reach American shores. On the other, Caracas casts itself as a besieged nation, standing firm against what it calls an aggression in the making. The question that lingers is not just whether these skirmishes continue, but whether they spiral. With 3 Venezuelan vessels already destroyed, a fishing fleet allegedly harassed, and both leaders entrenched in their positions, the risk of miscalculation grows by the day. From Washington to Caracas and across the Caribbean Sea, the world is watching as 2 presidents lock horns in a confrontation that is part military, part political, and wholly combustible.